What is going on, guys? Welcome back to a different episode of Vive Nutrition Radio. So we get the chance to actually do this live in mi casa, in our little podcast studio, office, man cave, whatever you want to call it. And I have my podcast sidekick. If you've never seen his face, here it is. So we have Antonio Castillo here, and in one of our chit chat series, we're gonna try to do this a little bit more often. Well, today we're talking about fat diets, and we're just gonna dive a little bit more into like what we hear a lot in the news and stuff like this, and obviously kind of give our take on it. A big one, because I do work with a lot of CrossFitters, and I do CrossFit myself, is Paleo. So Paleo has been around for a few years. And I think there's advantages to it. So I'm just going to define it real quick.
Hold on a second. Wouldn't you say it's been around for millions of years? You
got me on that one. Yes. So paleo, and like it's been eaten since like people have lived in caves. So I get that. But it's been commercialized.
There you go. All right.
It's been sold.
Hey, I'm holding you to evidence-based.
It's been sold as a thing like very recently. So paleo, the whole concept behind it, and I forgot the guy that wrote the book about this, but essentially he said that we needed to eat like our ancestors, like our cavemen, because essentially they had a diet that was mainly, and there's a lot of controversy on this, but depending on the side of the world that you're talking about, very heavy meat, obviously no processed foods. They didn't really have like places to process food at that point, including grains, high vegetables, high things that come from the ground, so potatoes and things like that, and obviously no dairy, none of that, anything that would actually come from like animals that way. Just essentially they would just hunt and gather, and hunting for animals and gathering for fruits and vegetables and things of that sort. So that's like the basic definition of it. But of course there are variations, because everybody likes to come up with variations to every single diet, because they like to add a little spin to it and maybe sell it in a different way.
Exactly.
So what are your, let's talk about advantages and disadvantages, or anything like you like to add on that part?
So I've definitely done it before, and yes, I lost a lot of weight because I cut out a lot of processed foods, right? But I've seen you definitely have protein bars too, and they're delicious, and I like to have them from time to time. I like having ice cream. I like having froyo. So again, not a sustainable diet. But I also don't like that it doesn't have grains, and I love grains. Coming from a Latin background, rice and beans is like a staple of every day. And I know you have arepas, which come from grains, right? But that's from corn. So could you have it on a paleo diet?
Technically speaking, I believe not, because corn at that point in time was supposedly not cropped and processed to be able to kind of extract like corn flour, for example. So technically no. So I guess from that perspective, you would say no. It was essentially just very specific things. Advantages, there are a ton, but what is like the main thing why people actually see quick results and all this stuff is why, and you said it earlier, you cut out a lot of processed foods out of your diet. You're not eating McDonald's anymore, because paleo men didn't have McDonald's back then. So you're cutting out a ton of stuff out of your diet that it's just obviously not really kind of giving you anything else. So if you wanted to do it because you're trying to cut out, if your goal is to cut out processed foods, kudos. That is a good way to do it, correct? I mean, I guess like one way of many different ways that you can do it. Is it the only way? Probably not. So I guess advantages, cutting out processed food, would say, right?
Yep. I agree. I think that's a huge advantage. It's helped people cut weight because they actually see that there's other foods out there than just McDonald's and fast food. But again, the sustainability part, like how sustainable can you be on that forever? And I've actually worked with an athlete that was on paleo, and once we switched him back to eating, I guess normal food, right? Like just being okay with having breads and grains again, he performed way better.
Well, if you think about it, for an athlete, an athlete has much higher needs that, let's say you and I, that would just work out like 1 hour a day or so. So when you think about their carb sources, it's essentially fruit and shit ton of sweet potatoes. I don't know if you about you guys listening in, but or watching, but if you try to do, let's say for example, 200 grams of carbs from sweet potatoes, like you won't. Well, the good thing is like you'll be able to kind of restrict calories easier, because you'll be full all the time. It's because it's a high fiber, it's just kind of very filling. So when you look at it that way, it's just very hard for somebody. And I worked with a CrossFitter that did paleo at some point, and we had to put him on 400 grams of carbs or more, because he was training 2 to 3 hours a day, similar to like an NFL athlete, some of those things. And he just couldn't do it. He's just like, I'm force feeding myself. So obviously that's not the idea. So when we started incorporating some other things, then obviously things start to happen. So I guess that's another, I wouldn't say disadvantage, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, you eating a lot of foods from the ground, and that's great and stuff like this, but it's like it depends on the person, I would say.
Kind of like we were talking about how some people adapt diets to themselves. I think an adapted paleo would be an okay diet to follow, as long as you could adapt it to daily life and you could eat the things you actually liked. But try to cut out some of the processed foods is a good way to start.
So overall, it's not an unhealthy thing to do, like cutting out everything at once, because they do have, I would say it's a moderate to low carbohydrate, high protein, and then high fat, because they do say that you can do avocados, and people of rely on some of those things. So I guess you would consider that, but they're not really necessarily cutting out food groups, so that's an advantage. Disadvantage is just the sustainability of it.
Well, they cut out dairy.
Oh, they do cut out dairy, so that's one.
That would be the one. So like calcium, right?
Yeah.
Especially someone who's growing, or an athlete that's constantly rebuilding bones.
Yeah.
That's something that's very important to look for.
Yeah.
And I love Greek yogurt as a snack. And if they have a protein shake post-workout, unfortunately, that's dairy if it's a whey protein. Yeah. So always looking at that as well.
Yeah. And I think it's funny, just to kind of finish off on like the paleo part that we're talking about, is the fact that there's like cans of like, there's like a paleo certification. So you see, for example, a can of an energy drink that is like paleo friendly. Like, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Like, what does that mean? Like, are you telling me that there were energy drinks in Paleolithic eras? I doubt that, I doubt it. But then the other controversy that exists is like, depending on the areas in the world that you're talking about, Paleolithic era, there are people that could not, let's say, for example, that would not hunt, so they would actually become more plant-based for a period of almost 6 months. So now you're saying that paleo would have to be plant-based. So there's just a lot of stuff to it. At the end of the day, they're just kind of putting a name to something that shouldn't have a name to it anyways.
I agree.
So your take on it? Would you do this? Well, you've done it.
I've done it. Yeah, I just wouldn't do it long term.
Okay.
I think it's like a good stepping stone if you want to kind of learn.
Oh, cool. And we're going to talk about stepping stones and like what to do, the diet after the diet, which is, I think it's important to also consider too. I would do it. I think it's something definitely that I would recommend for some people that are maybe starting off and trying to cut out a lot of crap out of their diet, but having a post plan, because I feel like, when you think, when any of these diets we're talking about, you're kind of putting a beginning and end day to it. So it's just obviously thinking ahead and what's going to happen after. So that's important. So final thoughts. I think that's pretty much covers most of it.
Yeah.